Thank you, Mihir. Warm welcome to everyone attending to this panel discussion. Before anything else, I would like to introduce our speakers for the day. We are extremely humbled to be in the company of Sudeep Chakraborty and Shamrat Chaudhary. Sudeep Chaudhary Chakraborty is an author, historian, researcher, policy analyst, columnist, and media consultant. He is at present the director of the Center for South Asian Studies at the University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh, and an associate professor of South Asian Studies. He is the author of several books of nonfiction and fiction and editor of several anthologies. His latest book is The Eastern Gate: War and Peace in Nagaland, Manipur, and India's Far East, published by Simon and Schuster in 2022. His other books include Plasi, The Battle That Changed the Course of Indian History, The Bengalis, A Portrait of a Community, Highway 39, Journeys Through a Fractured Land, and Red Sun, Travels Through Naxalite Country. His multidisciplinary essays and reportage, ranging from governance to conflict issues, are contained in several South Asian and global anthologies. Shudeep has written nearly 1,000 articles, columns, and essays for publications and think tanks that include the Asian Wall Street Journal, Mint, Digite, India Today, Hindustan Times, The Daily Star, Dhaka Tribune, Doinik Bonik Barta, Business Today, Forbes, Fortune, Business World, The Telegraph, India Quarterly, Seminar, Biblio, The Gateway House, The Strategic Intelligence, LiveHistoryIndia.com, and Rolling Stone, besides blueprinting several publications, landmark conferences, and think tanks. He has nearly 4 decades of experience in media and has earlier worked with major global and South Asian organizations. He began his career at the Asian Wall Street Journal and subsequently held leadership positions at India Today magazine, HT Media, and India Today Group. Shamrat Chaudhary is an author and journalist from Shillong and a former editor of newspapers in Delhi, Mumbai, and Bengaluru. His latest book is Northeast India, A Political History, published by Hearst in the UK and HarperCollins in India. His earlier works include a travelogue, The Braided River, A Journey Along the Brahmaputra, which was published by HarperCollins in 2021, and a novel, The Urban Jungle, which was published by Penguin and nominated for the Man Asian Literary Prize. He writes op-eds, analysis, and occasional reportage about India for a number of national and international publications. Now, the topic for today's discussion is Home for No One, as we all know, Manipur and belonging in the idea of India. The country was suddenly exposed to the terribly disturbing state of affairs in Manipur after a video of 2 Kuki women completely stripped of their clothes appeared on the internet, where they were seen being marched by a gang of Meitei men to a nearby field to be raped. It is to be noted that the video surfaced on the internet only on 19 July, whereas the incident, as a number of sources indicate, took place on 4th of May, a day after the clashes between the Kuki and the Meitei broke out. The government of Manipur, while reluctant to take active measures to prevent the conflict, was very quick to suspend internet services in the region from the very day of the commencement of the conflict. Since then, Manipur has been gripped by an orgy of violence and ethnic clashes that has claimed the lives of hundreds of people. The Kukis constitute the majority of the victims. There have been numerous incidents of rape and other forms of gendered violence. It is impossible for quite obvious reasons to arrive at numerical figures that represent the reality. The internet shutdown has quite naturally had an impact on the access to informational, educational, healthcare, banking, official, and other employment-related facilities. In this panel discussion, we would be aiming to throw some historical perspective into the current situation in Manipur. We would also be trying to understand the larger repercussions that this conflict would have on the other northeastern states. That being said, and without any further ado, I would like to hand the floor to Shamrat Babu for his opening address.
Yeah, thanks, Niruhit. I mean, as you're saying, things in Manipur have been, as we all know, really bad, and so how it all erupted so suddenly took most people by surprise. But the fact of the matter is that the troubles were simmering for a while, and one aspect of these present troubles, of which there are several, has been related to the issue of alleged illegal immigration from Myanmar, which in turn has connections with the civil war there. So, what I'll touch upon is mostly the historical aspects. I'll try to talk about how the connection of political events between Myanmar and Manipur is in fact very old. It could even be argued that ancient connections in that general geographical area led in a train of one thing leading to another to the integration of Northeast India into the empire of British India. And so the story starts with Burma in the mid 1700s, which was a considerable power at the time. In 1765, a powerful Burmese army attacked the kingdom of Siam in what is now Thailand. They laid siege to the capital of Ayutthaya or Ayodhya. The name is the same as the Ayodhya in North India from the Ramayana, and eventually they sacked that Ayodhya in Thailand, despite simultaneously facing attack from the Chinese. The Burmese forces managed to hold off the attempted Chinese invasion, and even though the Chinese returned in greater numbers again and again several times, they were unsuccessful. At last, in 1769, tired from the endless fighting, the generals of the two sides concluded a treaty and the Chinese withdrew. When he heard that the Chinese had been allowed to depart, the Burmese king was angry. He thought they should all have been killed, wrote G.E. Harvey in his History of Burma. So the armies, afraid to return home, went off to Manipur in January 1770. The generals wanted to loot slaves and cattle with which to placate the Burmese king. The men of Manipur fought gallantly but were overwhelmed in a 3-day battle near Langthaba. The Raja fled to Assam. The Burmese raised their own nominee, the Moirang Raja, to the throne and returned, taking with them such of the population as were not hiding in the roads. 3 years later, the Burmese were back in Manipur again. Once again, Jai Singh, the king of Manipur, was forced to flee. And once again, he returned in a few months after the Burmese forces had left. After Jai Singh's rule, there was a fresh period of instability marked by repeated clashes between different claimants for the throne of Manipur. In 1806, one of these claimants for the Manipur throne, Marjit Singh, the brother of the then king Churajit Singh, rebelled. His first rebellion was put down with difficulty, upon which he fled to Burma via Kachar and Arakan. He returned in 1812 at the head of a large Burmese army, obtained in exchange for a promise to give up Manipur's claims to the Kabao Valley and to acknowledge his dependence on the king of Burma. But after his successful invasion of Manipur and his ascent to the throne, Marjit fell foul of his Burmese allies. And on the occasion of the coronation of the powerful Burmese monarch Baghido in 1819, when all the tributary kings were summoned to attend and pay homage, Marjit declined to go. This was seen as a deliberate insult. The Burmese monarchs, who then considered themselves the most powerful in the world, sent an army to invade Manipur and the neighboring Ahom kingdom, whose ruler they had also helped to install. A period remembered in Manipur as the 7 years of devastation followed. Marjit and one of his brothers, Gambhir Singh, now approached the British for help. While it was not yet forthcoming, the rise of Burmese power was pushing events in that direction. In September 1823, the Burmese suddenly launched a midnight attack on a British outpost on the island of Shapuri near Teknaf in what is now Bangladesh, close to where Sudeep, I believe, is based. And there had earlier been raids against the Burmese by Arakanese rebels who had bases in that general area, and the issue was festering for a while. Tensions between the two sides began to escalate. Burmese forces were by then already in Assam and Manipur, and after they advanced into Sylhet, in what is now eastern Bangladesh, just down the hill from Meghalaya, the British became concerned about a military threat to Bengal that could potentially reach as far as Calcutta. On 5th March 1824, the Viceroy of India declared war on Burma. When the war ended, 2 years later, it was in the defeat of the Burmese, and the treaty was signed in the town of Yandabo in February 1826 between the Burmese and the British. This brought the former Ahom territories in Assam, Kachar also in Assam, the Jaintia Hills in Meghalaya, and also the plains, and apart from Arakan and Tenasserim in Burma under British rule. Some parts of northeast India thus, for the first time, entered the political unit of British India. So basically, it starts with a conflict in Manipur, and it ends with all these areas becoming part of the British Indian Empire. But it didn't all become part of British India all at once. That took some time. On the basis of projected revenue earnings, the Company Raj annexed only the areas known as Lower Assam to, which is basically the part of which is along the lower course of the Brahmaputra, to its existing territories in Bengal. The cost of holding, securing, and administering the other areas was not thought to be worth the revenue benefits that would accrue. One part of Upper Assam, which had been part of the erstwhile Ahom kingdom, was in fact given back to the Ahom king, Purandar Singha, on the promise that he would pay an annual tribute of 50,000 rupees. Another part, around Tinsukia, which was under a different ruler, known as the Bor Senapati, the chief of the Motok community, remained under him. But all that was about to change. So their seeming generosity in leaving those areas, which was actually based on their uh, calculations of revenue, uh, were about to change because the British had discovered something very precious in these lands, which was tea. Apart from land revenue, which was its biggest source of income, it was tea from China that had built the British East India Company's fortunes. The East India Company used to grow and export opium from India, in exchange for which they got tea from China. Amitabh Ghosh's latest book, Smoke and Ashes, is about that, and it's very fantastic, the details that he comes out with. A lot of fortunes were then made by big Indian businessmen who were part of this industry, which formed the biggest, for a while, formed the biggest source of export earnings for British India. The Chinese government did not want this. They wanted silver in payment for their tea, but the company preferred the drug free, and that led to the Opium Wars with China. It started in 1839, the first Opium War. The tensions with China and the eventual fighting forced the company to start looking seriously for alternative sources of tea, and they found it in Assam. By the mid 1830s, it had been established quite well, quite solidly, that tea grew in Assam. An experimental tea garden was set up in Upper Assam, which was run by a man named Charles Bruce. A small sample from this garden reached London in 1836. And the first full shipment of Assam tea was in the office of the Calcutta Tea Committee by March 1838. So it is probably not a coincidence that Upper Assam was finally annexed to the British Indian Empire around the same time, a full 12 years after their British victory in the Anglo-Burmese War and the resulting Treaty of Rendezvous. So they waited for 12 years until they were sure about the revenue benefits, and then they annexed it. The annexation of Upper Assam brought British India to the edges of the hills that surround the Brahmaputra Valley. It was after this that the areas of what are now Nagaland, Mizoram, and Arunachal Pradesh began gradually to come under British influence. The annexation of Upper Assam and the establishment of tea plantations required something that soon brought the new rulers into conflict with the various tribal peoples living in the hills, which was land. As the tea plantations expanded towards the surrounding hills around the Brahmaputra Valley, they began to come into conflict with the tribes who lived in those hills. Many of those tribes had ancient traditions of headhunting. What started to happen was that as plantations, agriculture, settlements, and other forms of uh, commercial activity linked to the global market, for example, even rubber could be found in some of the forests of those hills growing wild, and so there were rubber tappers going into the hills. They began to face headhunting raids from the tribes. Uh, so basically, the commercial activity contributed to conflicts, which led to headhunting raids from the hill tribes. The British tended to conclude that this was quite simply because the tribes were headhunters. In other words, that it was a part of the social tradition. So, for example, there is this account by a British officer named Colonel Frederick Lister, who was from the Select Light Infantry around the 1840s. No Kuki chief could go, this is a quote unquote, no Kuki chief could go on his last journey unaccompanied by attendants to do his bidding in the unseen world, wrote Lister. The affection of his clansmen was not, however, put to too great a strain. They had not themselves to go away, meaning die and go with their chief, so long as they could supply Bengali slaves, whose heads piled around the corpse of the chief were earnest that their ghosts were keeping company with his. But slaves were scarce in the hills since the British government had discouraged this trade. So Lal Chokla and his cousin Botai, who were the relatives of the deceased chief, hung their great relative's body in the smoke and set forth on the warpath to slay the prescribed number of victims. The raiders attacked a Manipuri village and made off with 20 heads, which naturally had to be separated from the bodies before they could be carried away. So it is probably not a coincidence that a Manipuri village was attacked in this raid that Lister has written about. It so happens that these raids had come after the death of the chief mentioned, a Meitei chief, who had passed away following alleged mistreatment at the hands of two Manipuri princes near the Sylhet border, leaving his son, the Lal Chokla mentioned earlier, to head the tribe. So it is a headhunting raid, but there are other dimensions to it as well. Tensions over various issues between the British administration and the hill tribes over headhunting raids and abduction of people into slavery by one side, and the encroachment of planters, loggers, and others into tribal lands on the others remained unresolved. Eventually, in practically every direction, with the Naga, Mizo, and Kuki tribes, and Adi and other tribes of Arunachal as well, there were major military expeditions which eventually saw the British administration reluctantly expanding its presence into the hills. The higher echelons of the British administration remained adamant against the expansion of their empire into the hills of northeast India for many years. So there were letters from governor generals in the 1850s, 60s talking against expansion, and the sentiment can be found even much later, even close to 1900. For example, on 25th November 1896, Sir William Ward, the Chief Commissioner of Assam, wrote a letter which runs as follows, quote unquote, I have always been opposed to extending our area of political control, which is always followed by annexation, as in the case of Mokokchung subdivision, which is in the Ao Naga area. To annexation succeeds a further area of political control and further annexation, etc. All this annexation means further expenditure. North Lushai, which is in the Mizo Hills, is bad enough with its expenditure of 5.5 lakhs a year and revenue of rupees 7,000 only. So they're still calculating revenues and thinking that no, we don't want to actually annex these areas. His successor, William Ward's successor, Sir Henry Cotton, endorsed this position. So even after that, you see endorsement. He says, I agree entirely with Sir William Ward's views and would object strongly to any extension of political control if it can possibly be avoided. But what used to happen was that the officers on the ground who found uh, used to find themselves at the receiving end of the having to deal with the various raids and other troubles also ended up leading the response. And so bit by bit, with raids followed by British expeditions, uh, usually counter raids that eventually grew and snowballed into expeditions that saw the extension of administration and the establishment of towns. For example, Kohima and Aizawl. And in this way, the hills gradually came to be a part of British India. There was one direction in which this process occurred very late in the day, after 1900, and this was in the direction of China, in what is now Arunachal Pradesh, where it was finally not tribal raids alone that forced the British to launch various expeditions to bring these areas into British India, because there were other dimensions. Around May 1910, two Tibetans arrived in Pango, a small Mishmi village up in the Lohit Valley. They brought word that Chinese troops had occupied the Tibetan town of Rima a few days march away. The astonished villagers were informed that Zayul's new rulers, Zayul is the region in Tibet, expected them to carve them a track all the way from Tibet to the plains of Assam. One anonymous government report of the time stated, so long as tribal territory lay between us and the peacefully dormant Tibet, an undefined frontier presented neither inconvenience nor danger. With the recent changes in that country, however, the question of a boundary well defined and at a safe distance from our administrative border became one of imperative importance and admitted of no delay. So the recent changes which they're talking about in this report was an invasion of Tibet by Chinese forces which reached Lhasa in the spring of 1910, after which the Dalai Lama fled to Darjeeling. In March 1911, a British officer named Noel Williamson went into the Siam River Valley with an expedition comprising of 47 porters and accompanied by a tea garden doctor named J.D. Gregorson. Regerson, Williamson, and 44 members of their party were massacred. Only three survivors made it back. After this massacre, the government of India, the then government of India, decided that it afforded an opportunity to carry out such surveys and exploration as needed. So they start sending out survey parties and exploration parties, and with the object of determining a suitable boundary between India and China. And they say about which at present we know practically nothing. So the government is saying at present we don't know anything about that area. And this eventually led to the drawing of the McMahon line, uh, which is the still disputed border between India and China. Uh, it was the entry of these areas. So basically, in every direction, I mean, all the boundaries that we have there, whether it's the McMahon line, which I've just mentioned, or other boundaries with Burma or with Bangladesh, all of them were drawn during the colonial period and bear the names of colonial officers. And it was the drawing of these boundaries and the entry of these areas into British India, the British Indian Empire, which paved the way for their subsequent entry into the successor state of India. So while it is true that there are ancient links of culture across the Indian subcontinent, you can find similar links of culture with Thailand and further east with Cambodia, Indonesia, even the Philippines. Uh, we must remember that the political unification of India was achieved only after 1947, when 562 princely states were brought together into British India uh, by into the existing British territories that eventually formed the current map of India. And we must also remember that this process uh, was not completed until the completion of what is now the region of Northeast India. And that happened with the entry of Sikkim in 1975. Sikkim joined the Indian Union in 1975. So it is easy to imagine a map of India that stretches back into the infinite past, but that is to forget history. The fact is that our, our history is one in which we are bound together by into this union by our flag and our constitution, which were adopted by the leaders of our freedom struggle between 1947 and 1950. I have gone a little beyond Manipur to look at Northeast India in a broader context. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shomar Babu, for that insightful lecture. Yeah, of course. Please go
Just
ahead.
a sec. I forgot that I wanted to show one map. How do I show that? Yeah. So this is, of course, the present map of Northeast India as it is. And this, I don't know how well you can see it, but this is the 1782 Renal map of Hindustan. Memoirs of a Map of Hindustan was the memoir that accompanied this map. And it's a very famous map. And over here, uh, this is the area which now constitutes Northeast India. So Assam, Mekhle, which is the old name of Manipur, and all these areas are, as you can see, outside the colored region. So that's all that I wanted to show. Thank you.
Thank you once again, Comrade Babu, for that historical insight, wonderful historical insight that you provided on the subject. Shudeep Babu, I would now move to you for your opening remarks, and after that, I think we will follow that with a moderated discussion.
Thank you very much, Nilohit, and thank you very much, Shamrat, for actually ending your sweep of history with the map, uh, without actually beginning with the map, because it helps me to sort of, I hope, take off from here and bring it to hopefully the unification that you hinted at, or attempts at unification, as I would put it. And I think we won't disagree on that score in particular. But I'm very happy you showed the map, and you specifically mentioned Mekli, the old name of Manipur, because that is exactly where I want to take this conversation. Sort of the transformation, if you will, sort of as part of the idea of India project. Or the idea of Northeast India project. So I think let me cut to chase and take us from where Shamrat left us, which is essentially at the cusp of independence. And let me move now to 1947, and let me begin with a little joke and anecdote. Is that when this is a true story because it's recorded in no less than an exalted anthropologist or sociologist as Dr. Verrier Elwin, his book Nagaland actually, which records sort of notations from the government of India records of the day that when after the Simon Commission actually went around and also sent a representative to the northeast, what we today call the northeast, and the Naga elders were quite concerned as to who would come after uh, the royalty, the British royalty, or the kings of England or the white man. So they knew that. So it's sort of I'm paraphrasing it that they knew that they would be possibly be black people now running India, not the white person, and they didn't mind that very much. But going by company records, they were very, very clear, the Naga elders, that they did not want it to be a Bengali at any cost. So I thought I should put it out there. Uh, I mean, this is fun in some ways, but it is a true story if you believe in the sources, as Dr. Verrier Elwin put them, and I've used it in a book that I wrote. Shamrat, you know about this. So I thought I'd begin there. Is that there was, uh, when we talk about unification and the idea of India, it began in not very salutary ways because, I mean, as you know, as Shamrat said, that several hundred so-called princely states had to be brought together under the sort of the Indian Dominion, as many went to the Pakistan Dominion as well, West and East both. And part of that was, I mean, a lot of that fractiousness, if you will, or let me put it this way, a lot of the sense of identity or the need for expressing specific identities, the same way that was being done by people in Maharashtra or what came to be called Tamil Nadu and so on and so forth, all across the Indian subcontinent of today, was also happening in what today we call northeastern India, which is basically in terms of definition, any place east of Kuch Bihar in northern West Bengal. But when that was happening, there's another thing that we need to keep in mind. I'll come to the sort of the identity aspects a little later, but I think we need to keep in mind what I believe was the core reason uh, with the distancing, if you will, the very sort of psychological distancing and the geographical distancing, physical distancing of what we today call northeastern India from what northeasterners, many people from northeastern India today call mainland India, which is the bulk of India, is when partition happened, you had in in the British times, in the colonial times, you had, though the Lushai Hills, which were still the Lushai Hills, and they hadn't yet become the Lushai Hills district and subsequently Mizoram, as we know it today. The Naga Hills were there, Naga Hills in Tuensang district, as it used to be called. Manipur was a kingdom. Tripura was a kingdom with parts of Tripura, Tipura, as it was called today, shared between present-day Tripura and present-day Bangladesh in the Kumilla area of Bangladesh. And you had Assam, which had its sort of vast enterprise, if you will, which is something that Shamrad hinted at. It was really, I mean, I look at it as like a political economy project and a business project more than a sort of a project of pure politics in the British construct. Uh, the Indians did it differently, but we'll come to that in a bit. So you had these identities. They were linked because the Bengal, undivided Bengal, was a part of the Indian Dominion at that time. Assam was a part of it. Out of Assam, there were other areas like the Naga Hills districts, and Tuensang was being administered essentially out of Assam by then, and Assam was also looking after, had sort of oversight over the Lushai Hills district to some extent, even though it was being handled partly out of Chittagong and partly out of other centers. So this is basically what India inherited in a sense, with the expectation that the same way that other princely states in mainland India would sort of go into for the Indian Dominion status, part of the Indian Dominion, and the other sort of the people who were part of the Indian geography would also sort of give in to the Indian administrative setup. But I think what happened is that because you had the creation of East Pakistan, in a way, the seamlessness which let you allow you to travel from Kolkata across present-day Bangladesh, past Dhaka, past Brahmanbaria, Akhara, and then reach the capital of Agartala in almost a straight line with seamless connections was no longer possible. Uh, the connectivity that permitted you to go from Dhaka, west of Dhaka, go upstream the conjoint Jamuna and Padda, and then travel up to what is Jamuna, and then becomes the Brahmaputra when it crosses over into the Indian state. And by the way, friends, it's the only transgender river in the world, huh? Just for the record. That I don't know of any other river that changes its gender when it travels westwards across Assam. From Brahmaputra, it becomes Jamuna the minute it enters Bangladesh. So that's another story for another time. So, there was this connectivity where you could actually take a steamer up from somewhere close to Dhaka and then get into the stream of the Brahmaputra and get close to Guwahati. There were transshipment, there were connectivity all across sort of riverine Bengal and connecting riverine Bengal to Assam in multiple different ways, connecting Bengal to Tripura, connecting Bengal to Manipur, connecting Bengal to various other parts, sort of the mainland aspect of India to the northeast. And I think when sort of the fist of East Pakistan punched in through that geographical reality, you suddenly had a very physical distancing of northeastern India that took place, which Shamrat's map would show when it segued from the wonderful Renal map to the map of northeast, which is in present-day India, as he showed it. So you saw that the difference taking place, and I think that it was almost like an afterthought out of when you looked at this sort of far eastern aspect from New Delhi. It was sort of connected to the mainland by what we famously now call the chicken's neck, which is the Shiliguri corridor, in other words. So I think that also led to a sort of a very physical othering of Eastern India, Far Eastern India. I don't like to use the word Northeast. I prefer to call it Far Eastern India. And also, sort of, it led to a sort of a people are not like us kind of thing. I mean, Assam, because it actually fought uh, to remain within the Indian Dominion through the, sort of as a part of the partition project, directly as a part of the partition project, was still pretty much on the sort of the mainland Indian radar, right? Because you had Gopinath Bartolai and other people who sort of actually actively fought for the what I might call the partition project to retain India. But every place east of Assam, or even like east of Guwahati, if you will, seemed to be the sort of land of exotica. And I think uh, beyond the fact, where people when they stood up for, and I'm laying this groundwork in order to bring you to the present day and our general topic about Manipur, because for me it's sort of a domino effect of mergers and acquisitions, if you will, which began, uh, as Shamrad mentioned, from the times of the British Dominion, British Crown Dominion, and passed on, I believe, very, very definitely, that it passed on to the Indian political psychology as well, the sort of mergers and acquisitions phase, which the idea of India began as mergers and acquisitions, putting India together through mergers and acquisitions. So, in that sense, I would say that Manipur became a mergers and acquisitions situation in 1949 when it formally sort of acceded to the Indian Union. Uh, Many people say that it happened coercively, and in Shamrad's hometown of Shillong, when where the Manipuri king was at the time, I mean, the regent was with the young king, and he was pressured into signing over the kingdom of Manipur to the Indian Dominion. So that was one. And then Tripura sort of acceded to the Indian Dominion around the same time. Again, a situation of a young king and a regent and the regent Kanchan Prabha Devi, the grandmother of the present titular king of Tripura, Pradot Manika, and so on and so forth. So you had these two exceptions, but the Naga hills and even among the Manipuri kingdom, I mean the hills of Manipur, there was sort of a and the Lushai Hills were, of course, their own entity. They were not Mizoram as we know it. They were administered from Assam, actually. Uh, the Lushai Hills district was under the direct administrative control of Assam. It passed to that. And so that's how sort of we come into 47, 48, 49. And what, and, and I think this sort of sense of identity and sense of fracture that pervades many parts of what we call northeastern India till the present day, and definitely is a part of the chaos and abomination in Manipur as we see it today. I think it has roots in that time because when the Nagas stood up and said that, look, we are Naga people, we want our identity and dignity respected, we want to be counted as people, the correct uh, reaction should have been yes, and how can we work with you to integrate you or work with you to acknowledge you and make you part of the Indian Union or the idea of India the same way it was done in Gujarat, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Telangana, Telugu, and what became Andhra Pradesh, Bengal, Bihar, the United Provinces, later on into Uttar Pradesh. So there was a knitting project that was taking place in India, but somehow when it came to the acknowledgement of separate dignities and identities and aspirations in northeastern India, I think our founding fathers and founding mothers fell far short of the mean that we today take for granted, because we don't envelop them in that sense. So Mr. Nehru, unfortunately, at that time, and his cabinet colleagues, and I think the security forces at the time, pushed back immensely hard, and then instead of dialoguing with the Naga people, they sort of said, you're with us or else. And I won't go into details now, but it in very short order, it sort of escalated into war and escalated um, into outright conflict with what I think was war crimes committed, uh, which India will never acknowledge, does not have yet the courage to acknowledge. And there were similar issues of slippage that happened in Mizoram, where because of uh, disaster mismanagement, disaster relief mismanagement, India basically helped to birth a freaking rebellion, the Mizo rebellion. I mean, that's when you look into it, you look at the triggers. The Mizos didn't say we were going to leave India and go wherever we needed to. They just wanted to be looked after. And then the Mizo rebellion grew, and from 1966, it took until 1986 to get that sorted out. Uh, and the peace so far holds. Now, Tripura, of course, you had identity issues, and then sort of the Bengalification of Tripura happened, where the Tripuris, the indigenous Tripuris, went from being 70% of Tripura to being 30% of Tripura. So these things began to happen as well. In Manipur, you had a sort of a sense of outrage to some extent, because Manipur, like Tripura, was a very, very proud kingdom, proud people, led by the Meitei, with sort of um, what sort of uneasy, sometimes expedient alliances with the hill people, if you want to call them that, basically the tribes who identify as the Naga, tribes who identify as the Zo, tribes who identify as the Kuki, because these were all part of the Manipuri construct. It's not just about the Meitei people, even though the name Mekli is a Meitei construct. The name Kangleipak is a Meitei construct. And in 1717, when a Manipuri king Pamheva decided to convert to make Hinduism the state religion, and I'm going to come to that directly and end it with that particular point, and then maybe we can come back to the current upsurge of violence, because there's a direct correlation with that. In 1717, King Pamheba actually declared Hinduism as a state religion of Manipur, because there was a lot of influx of sort of Bengali Brahmins, if you will, for a while, particularly from Sylhet, the Sylhet area, and Eastern Bengal into the court of Manipur. They were that became the Chanukyas of Manipur, if you will, as well as the administrator of the key administrators of Manipur in many respects. And Pamheba actually let go of his name and took on the name of Garib Nawaz. I think it was a bit of an oddball. Anyway, so that led to Manipur becoming a sort of a Hindu kingdom, if you will, even though it had then and continues to have a very, very lovely, lovely sort of animistic religion, nature-led religion called Sanamahi, which if you study, you will see that it's an absolutely fascinating and absolutely wonderful, wonderful practice, very close to nature, very close to life itself. Anyway, so cut to chase. So Manipur has sort of underwent, if you will, this identity change in the early 18th century, which was imposed on the Manipuri people. It was not voluntary; it was sort of imposed on them. And then you had the growth of sort of the Hindus, the Hindu factor in Manipur since the early 18th century, right? So we need to keep that in mind when we talk about majoritarianism and religion playing a part in present-day Manipur. It has its roots in the sort of religious transformation that was imposed on the Meitei, uh, primarily, not on the Nagas or the Kuki or the Mar or the Zo people, but on the Meitei people, and that's just how uh, Manipur became a sort of a BJP RSS project, if you will, a reclamation project. So I'll come to that quickly, but I want to sort of take you through this sort of the sweep that Shamrat began with, and sort of take you to this sweep of the present day. Is what I want to put to you is that place before you is that the sort of the need for identity and the sort of the need for dignity never went away. Uh, Even when Manipur became, and Nagaland, and the Lushai Hills became a part of India, and Assam itself. Assam went through its immense turmoil from beginning the late 70s and early 80s, yeah, and it actually hasn't quite ended yet in many ways. So, so the idea of India played out in different ways in different places. Now, in Manipur, coming to Manipur, the identity played out in different ways, and there's been multiple rebellions in Manipur against the idea of India, where because it was felt that India was imposing its sort of political identity too forcefully. It was not giving weight to Manipuri identity, Meitei in this particular context, because the Nagas had their own coalition, if you will, of rebellion and claiming of identity and dignity. But in Manipur, the Meitei rebel groups became the voice and the focus of this. So that was happening as well alongside. So in Manipur, you had a double layered thing where you had uh, the Meitei or the slash Manipuri people claiming in this fight to claim their identity, to retain their identity and their pride and their dignity within the idea of India, because they had an idea of Manipur, which we need to acknowledge. And within that idea of Manipur, you had Nagas and Kukis and the Zo people who had their identities as well, which they needed to protect. And that is something that they fought for. Uh, After the lines were drawn into the states of Nagaland, into the state of Manipur, into the state of Mizoram, into the state of Tripura as we know them today, these lines morphed and evolved over several decades into these sort of so seemingly indelible lines of the present day. But the people who lived in and around these lines have had their sort of homelands, if you will, and the need for protecting their homelands and their identity. So Manipur inherited this sort of identity, and it sort of segued and morphed into the sort of the seething nature of the present day. And here I would take you back and stop to the Hindu conversion, that sort of transition into a Hindu official Hindu religion that you have. That made it very, very attractive from the early part of the 20th century, 1930s, 1940s onwards, to what in Manipur came to be called the Nikhil Manipuri Mahasabha, for instance. Right? So they were the early evangelizers and the keepers of the faith, the Hindu faith in Manipur, if you will, the Vaishnava faith in Manipur. And then later on, I mean, that's always remained it's remained sort of the core culture, even though the Sanamani culture remained alongside. Sometimes ebb, sometimes flow, Juar Bhata, to use a very Bengali phrase. Now, and that makes it, to cut to the chase very quickly, that has made it very attractive to the sort of the Hindu majoritarianism project of that sort of souped up, if you will, that sort of went into drive in the late 80s and has gone into hyperdrive in the last 15 years. Now, so now the project is, which is why the BJP made its foray into Manipur, thinking it would win, and it has twice over, like it thought it would win Tripura, which it has twice over, uh, by focusing on this vote bank of this uh, ideologically driven and the Hindu majority, which lets the BJP slash its spiritual gurus of the RSS, if you will, to reach out into Manipur and present this project. So I believe, again, to cut to chase, we can talk about this later in the thing, that the root of the present day abomination in Manipur, which began technically on 2nd of May, I guess, 2nd May 3rd, when the Manipur High Court permitted the petition to the hearing to for the conversion of the status of the Meitei to be them to be accorded the status of scheduled tribes. Two things happened. It made the Naga people and the Kuki people and the Zo people quite worried that because they were given reservations in affirmative action under sixth schedule of the Constitution and Article 371 A, B, C, D, E, H, which is in all across Northeast. In Manipur, if I'm not wrong, Shamrad, is Article 371C, and they felt that they were going to be done out of their special status in Manipur, which protected their lands, which were the lands of the hill people. And I believe that this happened, even though you will hear a lot of talk about how politics has nothing to do with it. But we do know that today judiciary can be influenced, and that was and I believe that push came in order to protect the majority vote bank in Manipur. That is the way I read it, and that is the way I've talked about it. That is the way I see it. It led to tension, then it led to a sort of confrontation on the street, and then someone picks up a stick, someone picks up a brick, someone picks up a stone, attacks somebody else, and quite like it happened in partition, that you had one aggrieved party beginning to attack another aggrieved party, whether deliberately in an engineered way or emotionally driven by emotion, it sort of escalated into this sort of Meitei versus Kuki, as we call it, though we forget that the Nagas were very much a part of the initial protests against uh, the admission of what I would call the majoritarian project into the Manipur High Court. So I'll stop it here because I just wanted to plant a sweep as well as plant the notion that it has multiple levels of uh, uh, reclamation of identity and protection of identity and dignity and territory, land, 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 land. I will say this again and again. Shomrat began with, very perceptively began with the British needing to control of land and the British seeing everything from a perspective of revenue. It is not a matter of revenue today in the British in British terms. Land is very much a part of it, but it is now land as seen as both livelihood and also land is seen as territorial control, not necessarily from the point of view of revenue, but from the point of view of sort of ethnic territoriality and livelihood territoriality. I think it's sort of morphed to that particular stage right now. So I'll stop here because Shomrat and I can carry on gabbing for hours on this, but I'll stop. And my apologies if I've gone a little over 20 minutes. But this is a subject this is a people, Manipur, northeastern India, is something very close to my heart, as Shomrat knows, very close to his heart as well. And um, feel very deeply engaged with the people and places. And so forgive me if I get too drawn into my comments and observations. Thank you, Nilu.
Shruti Babu, thank you very much for guiding us to the post-colonial history and also through the issues of Manipuri identity. And Shamrat Babu, I think you talked about how we came to that India came to inherit Manipur as a part of its colonial legacy. I, as far as my readings go back, I also know that there were multiple possibilities that were presented in front of the colonial administration. That there was this governor of Assam called Raid, who wanted a separate protectorate for these tribal states, for these tribal areas after the accession of power to the Indian government. So my question is for both of you: is how does the Sangh Parivar, which the presence of which I think precedes the existence of the BJP in the region, how does it try to fit Manipur into this whole, into their idea of an Akhand Bharat, of an Akhand Hindu Bharat? What are the exact idioms, political idioms that they're using in this project?
I think,
Shamrat, do you want me to take that?
yeah, because you were talking about that, so this seems like a continuation of what you were talking about.
All right. So again, I'll try to be. I mean, I won't take too much time. I hope, because I hope you have more questions to discuss. I think the construct comes in a manner that it's sort of a hyping up. It comes through rhetoric. It comes through pamphleteering. It comes through propaganda. It comes through a sort of uh, claiming in as many ways as possible that. Spiritually, ideologically, physically, psychologically, geographically, mythologically, because the Sangh is very driven to, and the BJP and the Sangh and its adjuncts are very, very, very driven to the concept of Akhand Bharat, not just through history, but through mythology. I'll give you an example. That there's this great extolling of the fact that and Biren Singh, the chief minister of N. Biren Singh, the chief minister of Manipur as we speak, went to Gujarat to address a political rally in 2018. And he actually spoke of Manipur being the mythological Manipur of the Mahabharata, and uh, led it how during the time of Krishna, uh, this is the Manipur of Mahabharata. You have, yeah, I think it's Kiran Rijiju, if I'm not wrong, and other colleagues have spoken about Arunachal Pradesh being a part of India in the times of Mahabharata. I mean, what are they smoking? Um, there is a gentleman with the Indian Space Research Organization. So I guess he can't be put behind bars, not yet, because he was also part of the Chandrayaan team, right? A Meitei gentleman who actually questioned this mythology that Mr. Biren Singh and his other colleagues have projected, and have actually said that the mythological Manipur in the Mahabharata is actually somewhere, can be geographically placed somewhere in Odisha and not in Manipur. So there is a scientist who's part of our grand project to reach the south pole of the moon, who himself and he's been celebrated as the Manipuri scientist as part of the Chandrayaan team. So deal with it. He's a bona fide uh, source and authority who speaks from his cartographic and scientific expertise in this particular project. So, I mean, you had these ridiculous constructs of trying to link Manipur, northeastern India, Arunachal Pradesh, into the sort of the mythological construct of the idea of India. To my mind, that's completely rubbish. I mean, how do you locate them in mythology? Mythology doesn't provide you definite geography. Mythology doesn't provide you definite culture. Mythology doesn't provide you definite politics. Mythology provides you mythology. And so when so there has been this sort of ongoing sort of ideological project, if you will, and then we come to the starkly political project, because the Sangh is an exceedingly organized entity, and they're extremely systematic. They're very well organized. They're everywhere. They're probably the largest and the most efficient NGO in the world, to my mind. Uh, when I see RSS and its constructs, and they've gone about it in a very systematic way. So they've gone not just to offer an alternative to the Congress. To my mind, I think it was pretty good that the Congress lost the elections in 2017 because they ran 3 uninterrupted terms of pure corruption and mayhem, uh, political mayhem and social mayhem, disappearances, human rights violations of the nth degree. Manipur is completely a failed province by itself in every way. Its the levels of corruption have been proven by the Comptroller and Auditor General of India and other places. So it was just destroyed, a destroyed entity. So in a way, maybe for Manipur, um, it was a good thing that the government changed of the Manipuri people. Nagas or Kuki, Meitei, everybody. Meitei, Pangal were the Muslim Meitei. Everybody. It was probably a sort of a sort of a necessary makeover in some way. And the BJP and the Sangh began, to my mind, in the right way. That they reached out to the communities. Ironically, they reached out to the Kukis, they reached out to the Zo people, they reached out to the Nagas. That Biren Singh himself traveled to the hill districts of Manipur and reached out to them, which I thought I've written, saying it was a wonderful thing to do. I hope he carries through this sort of, this effort of conciliation. But I think where slippage began to take place is when the political project or the majoritarian project or the ideological project, in order to ensure that Manipur remains a BJP bastion, Manipur remains the bastion of the Sangh, in the same way that Assam is seen as a bastion of the BJP and the Sangh today. The same way Tripura is viewed as the bastion of the BJP and the Sangh today. I think Manipur is also seen as the bastion of the BJP and the Sangh. And I think in the BJP Sangh construct of what they term, not my word, their ideologues have called it, including Biren Singh's recently departed political advisor, who is an alum of the India Foundation, a gentleman called Rajat Sethi. He and his colleagues have actually called BJP's, and his wife, I think, if I'm not wrong, has also, we've shared a sort of contentious platform at the Trivandrum Literature Festival some years ago. Uh, Actually describes the BJP and the Sangh's outreach in Manipur and other places as total politics. So I think this, when it comes to the level of total politics or anything goes politics in that construct, where information, disinformation, violence, engineering, re-engineering, pamphleteering, rhetoric, mythological construction and reconstruction, anything goes, then it becomes a dangerous space. And I think that kind of approach, despite all the talk and all the good talk of improving Manipur's infrastructure, improving outreach, and so on and so forth, well done. If all that's happening, well done. But I'm saying that the current violence is not a result of positive outreach. The current violence is a result of negative outreach. And that is, to my mind, the danger. So while I look at, I'm not playing politics here. I call a spade a spade. Maybe I call a spade a hydraulic excavator from time to time, but I mean well. So what I'm looking at here is that I think the sort of cynical outreach, the sort of ideologically driven political outreach of total politics is, I think, what has exacerbated the problem in Manipur, where it is very quickly escalated to a us versus them kind of situation. And it has led, to my mind, to lamentable uh, propagandeering, pamphleteering, and so on and so forth, where, for instance, it very quickly became a Meitei versus the Kuki thing. And BJP stalwarts and Sangh stalwarts for a long time went along with a sort of a pro-Meitei tilt. And there are people on the record, I'm not making this up, you can fact check me on this, have gone on and called the Kukis across the board as narco-terrorists. I mean, how dare you? Paint an entire people with that brush. And equally, Meiteis have been painted, all Meiteis have been painted in the same brush, which is also incorrect. Nagas have been painted in the same broad brush, also incorrect. The Zo have been painted with the same broad brush, also incorrect. But the thing is, when you're playing total politics, it becomes almost incumbent to paint people in broad brushes because you're not looking at nuance here. You're looking at protecting your base, your political base, and your vote bank, and so on and so forth. So that's how I think the transition from a sort of ideological, religious slash political project has, I think, triggered or sustained to my, uh, uh, the sort of total um collapse of governance in Manipur, uh, total collapse of law and order in Manipur, and a total collapse of trust and faith in Manipur from between one community and another. And that, to my mind, is absolutely shameful. It's a true lament of this malaise Manipur, which has been with us for so many decades. Nilo, thank you.
Shamrat Babu, your remarks on this?
Well, I think Sudeep's answer was quite comprehensive. Uh, as far as talking about mythology and places connected with Hindu mythology is concerned, I did mention, for example, in my presentation, the attack on Ayutthaya in Thailand, Ayodhya in Thailand, which was a precipitating factor in a in a sort of indirectly over a long term that led to uh, Manipur coming under Burmese occupation. So uh, we can find a lot of these connections, mythological connections, even with a lot of Southeast Asia. There are so many connections, and even historical. For example, the Angkor Wat temple. But I don't think that it would be practical to sort of imagine that all of these areas were actually a part of one political entity, or that they can even in the future be a part of one political entity. I mean, and if sometimes I do, think that if we are going to have some grand concept of an Akhand Bharat with a lot of wonderful territories in one map, then it would really be a pity to not include the island of Bali. I mean, please, if you're going to make an Akhand Bharat, please include Bali in Akhand Bharat.
In your dreams, Shamrat, in your dreams. Right?
Thank you, Shamrat Babu, and Shudip Babu. I have to thank you for bringing into the conversation the topic of narco-terrorism. So I had this question already in mind before this panel discussion started. So in 2022, just before the harvest season, the Manipuri government cracked down on the opium and also the poppy cultivations of the Kuki people in particular. So do you think that that crackdown has had some effect in somehow determining or in somehow adding to the insecurity of the Kuki people with regards to the current regime in Manipur?
I don't think so, because this sort of so-called interdiction of poppy growing areas. Poppy is what birds opium. The opium poppy is what's grown there. It's been happening for many years now. It's not. It didn't begin in 2022 or anything like that. I mean, I remember going. I visit Manipur as frequently as I can, and and records will show you that the government of Manipur, through its Narcotic Control Bureau and also agencies of the government of India, have been tracking and the growth and smuggling and transshipment of narcotics, not just within Manipur or northeastern India or into Bangladesh, but also into processing units in Myanmar, in the Shan and Wa states, and also notably in Rakhine province in sort of southwestern Myanmar, where the Rohingya conflagration took off. But that's another story. So let me come to the narcotics part. Right now, broadly, there is opium poppy grown in Manipur. There is marijuana grown in Manipur. And Manipur is also, we're not, which has not been mentioned. Manipur is also one of the most lucrative pipelines for smuggling of raw material, if you will, for the manufacture of methamphetamines. Uh, sort of meth, as the young people like to call it. Now, Manipur is a route for smuggling red sandalwood, which comes all the way from the so-called Virappan forests of Tamil Nadu and Karnataka and travels 3,000 kilometers or so all across through Assam, you know, and Nagaland and Manipur, right up to Myanmar and Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, everywhere. It's like these are thriving smuggling pipelines, of which narcotics are a part. Okay. Now, the cookie people or the cookie farmers are not, or some cookie farmers, not all cookie people engaged engaged in poppy farming. Uh, Nagas farmers have engaged in farming marijuana. Meitei farmers have engaged in farming marijuana. Uh, the Meitei, Kuki, Naga, Zo people are all, not entirely, but sections of them, are part of the smuggling food chain that is, in a way, the lifeblood of Manipur, not just its identity or its politics or its aspiration, but narcotics has for a long time, and weapons smuggling and narcotics has been a very important Manipuri food chain. And when I use Manipuri in this context, I mean all the ethnic groups in Manipur. I mean all the governance groups of Manipur. I mean all the political entities of Manipur. And let me not take specific names here. I'm clubbing all of them because they're all part of this ecosphere. So, to my mind, to single out the Kuki people and to call all of them narco terrorists, it is an absolute lie and a complete misdirection and complete propaganda. I have seen, I have personally visited Kuki farmers at the edge of Imphal Valley in the borderlands of the hill districts around sort of Bishnupur, closer to Churachandpur in the Bishnupur district, which is southwest of Imphal, south and southwest of Imphal. I've personally visited the home and the farms of cookie poppy farmers, and I've talked about why. We've discussed why they farm poppy because it's not economic to farm anything else. There is no benefit. So there are these issues, of course, but it's not like all cookies are farming poppy. I mean, when I'm the time I'm talking about this, the senior police, a cookie became a DGP, Director General of Police of Manipur, for heaven's sake. So did he farm poppy with his own hands? So this kind of ridiculous propaganda is floating around, which sort of leads to broad brush approaches of just painting everybody in a bad light because it helps your cause. And now that's wrong. That is the kind of rhetoric and that is the kind of narrative, and I think we should counter by preventing any community in Manipur or any community anywhere to be painted with this broad brush. So yes, there are poppy farmers among the cookies. Yes, cookie militant groups have benefited from the making of sort of the growing of opium poppy, the transformation of opium poppy into this from the sap into kami, the opium jelly, and transferring that, smuggling that across to Myanmar into heroin factories, and then them coming back into Manipur and other parts of northeastern India and traveling across. You see, I've seen this happening. I've seen this personally. I've also written about it in the book that which Shamrat was very kind to review not too long ago, last year sometime. So these are true stories. But equally, there are Meitei participants in that poppy chain. There are Meitei uh, businessmen, if you want to call them. I'm calling them businessmen because they're interested in revenue and money, who go and fund cookie farms for growing opium poppy. Can the Meitei deny this? Uh, there are uh, there are Meitei people who are part of. I mean, after all, the smuggling operation goes through all these territories, every territory. So there is. I've seen. I mean, if you say cookies are responsible for poppy and heroin, I've been to Moreh and other parts of Manipur where I've seen Meitei ladies who are called Ima, mother, respectfully, sell heroin. You know, so and I've seen it, I've witnessed this, I've photographed this. So I've written about it. So I think to sort of broad brush applications of blame is is wrong, is dangerous, is a misdirection, and it leads to sort of hyping up of rhetoric on either side. It has helped the radical Meitei groups to sort of foster this idea that the cookies are to blame for everything, and to also foster the idea that the cookies in their entirety being narco-terrorists. I mean, how dare you call an entire people narco-terrorists? I'm on the record saying this. How can you do that? I mean, it's ridiculous, and that has also helped sort of this sort of broad brushing of people and these extreme positions that have been taken, and unfortunately, a lot of the well-known sort of mainstream media heads sitting in New Delhi, who are now instant pundits about Manipur and northeastern India, have actually given space to people, premium space to people to mouth these, to my mind, these obscenities, which has led actually to more problems for Manipur and peacemaking or lack of peace in Manipur, and a complete erosion of trust between all communities, where nobody trusts the political parties, nobody trusts the government, nobody trusts the police, and they don't trust each other. What a sad state for Manipur to be in. And to blame it on one group, and to blame it on Poppy, for heaven's sake, grow up. Sorry, I feel quite strongly about it. You know,
Thank you, sir. And Comrade Babu, I think that in this juncture, it is very important to discuss if the Meitei demand for the tribal status and for the provisions of discriminatory justice under the Indian Constitution is justified at all. So I think that, and also, what are the exact? It is necessary to discuss what are the exact contending insecurities that are at play for the various ethnic communities of Manipur, also taking into consideration the migration of cookies from from Burma, from Myanmar, as a result of the coup. So, can you
Right.
please throw some light on that?
Right, right. I'll come to your questions. I'd just like to add a little bit. I mean, to the topic that Sudeep was talking about just now, and so basically, a lot of people have spoken about the narcotics angle as well, and there were some very interesting interviews of a police officer, former police officer named Thaunawjam Brinda, Manipuri Meitei police officer named Thaunawjam Brinda. So uh, she's spoken a lot about this, and in fact, she was uh, on the ground working on specifically this topic in Manipur. So I suppose that she is well informed on this subject, and it is also something which has been written about by many people for a long time. So, for example, there was a book which was published by a Manipuri scholar uh, in 2002, end of 2001, early 2002, named Vinalakshmi Nebra, a Meitei Manipuri scholar from India, which was about some of these issues. So it is, firstly, it is an old thing, and secondly, it has been written about by many people, including scholars and practitioners from Manipur itself. So, with just addition of that, in case anybody is interested in referring to any of this material, uh, your question about migration and insecurities. Um, well, I mean, migration is the one topic on which the whole of Northeast India gets very agitated, and that has been the case for a very long time. So, for example, the NRC was also about anxieties related to migration, and we have seen the politics of Northeast India for decades being uh, driven by anxieties about alleged large scale illegal immigration from Bangladesh. In fact, it was the anxiety which spread out from Northeast India into the rest of India and became a national issue in recent years. And uh, I have traveled, in some of those areas. I've traveled down the Brahmaputra. I've seen it from this side of the border and that side of the border. I've seen a few other of the borders from both sides as well, in the case of both Bangladesh as well as Burma. And uh, I think it seems to me, okay, first of all, we have to acknowledge that these borders are porous as they are meant to be, as is natural, because the idea of a border as a great wall is something which only somebody who has never been anywhere near a land border, except perhaps the little bit of border near Wagah, would imagine. So the imagination of a border is something which is problematic. But I've also spoken, for example, to BSF officers posted on the Assam border with Bangladesh, and who were patriotic soldiers, BSF men from northern India, who uh, vehemently denied that there was any migration, illegal immigration going on. This is in the few years ago, the recent past, relatively recent past, and so they said that हाँ पहले होता होगा, but it doesn't happen anymore, or it has not happened in recent years at any kind of scale. So we have these anxieties about a lot of vast migration. But when I started looking into it from the in the specific case of the so-called illegal immigration from Bangladesh in Assam, I realized that the anxieties go back to before partition, firstly, and that the actual large-scale migration from what is now Bangladesh, the Marmunshia migration, happened well before partition. It happened shortly after the partition of Bengal for the first time, 1905. So when East Bengal and Assam became one province, so that is the time when the bulk of the migration happened. And but the anxieties remain, and so now anybody who appears to be of East Bengal origin becomes suspected or becomes labeled a Bangladeshi. Earlier, the big thing in Northeast India was essentially a tribal. The larger divide was a tribal, non-tribal divide in many places, and so when we were growing up in Shillong, for example, even though we were not Muslim but Hindu, uh, we would also be attacked. I have personally faced it myself. Many Bengalis from Hindu Bengalis in Northeast India have also over the decades faced attack as suspected illegal immigrants from Bangladesh, and that has continued until the not too distant past as well. So it is not a matter related specifically to religion. There are issues of ethnicity as well, sometimes of language also. Uh, and so any Bengali speaker may be considered a bit suspect in many parts of Northeast India. Uh, the I mean, that has been the experience, personal experience, lived experience, and historical experience in post-partition India. So what happens with cross-border communities? For example, in the case of Manipur, you have this similarly, imaginary border with Burma, and you have the similar communities on both sides of the border, and so there is an anxiety that a lot of people are coming in from the other side, uh, and the matter is going to be disputed and debated, and nobody is, one side will keep thinking that a lot of people are coming, the other side will say, but we can't see any new people. The people who are here are almost all old people. There may be a few people who have come fleeing civil war there, but it's a small number. The question of numbers is important. How many people have come? If they have come, how many have come? Where have they settled when they have come? And uh, I think I found one UNHCR figure from last year. I'm forgetting the date, so I can't remember the date off the top of my head, but I remember more or less the figure roughly. And I referred to it in an article I wrote for the Caravan magazine, uh, which basically was that there were, till that time, whatever that date was, there were somewhere around 50,000 people who had fled the civil war in Myanmar and entered India. And out of that, somewhere around 40,000 had gone to Mizoram, somewhere around 7 or 8,000 had gone to Manipur, and particularly to the hill areas of Manipur, where the Kuki communities live. And a small fraction had gone to other places. So even if we were to accept, and even this figure is disputed, right? So some people say it's less than that, some people would say it's more than that. Even if this figure were to be accepted, I don't think that it is a figure that would justify what has followed. It does not just justify the anxiety that there is going to be a demographic change. And what has followed has been far beyond anything that, it has caused more anguish and more harm, more long term harm to Manipur as a state than the immigration of 8,000 people would have done.
Thank you, Shamrat Babu. And with this, I think that I will come to the last question, and this is also a question that Deepa George is asking. Given the situation when with the complete informational blockade as a result of the internet shutdown, do you think that we can aspire for a lasting peace in Manipur in the near future? And given the situation in Manipur and in this context, what are the larger repercussions that the conflict in Manipur is having on the Northeast at large? Now, would you like to reflect on the fate of that awaits the Christian majority states of Nagaland, Mizoram, and Meghalaya in the coming years? Thank you.
Um, so I don't. Can I go, Shamrat, if you don't mind?
Yeah, 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 please.
Okay. Uh, no, sorry. Would you like to say something? Then I can jump in. Feel free.
You want me to speak first? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
I'll throw in my
Okay.
two bits.
Okay. Well, I mean, news is, it's true that the blocking of the internet has prevented some news from coming out, but on the other hand, there have been some very good ground reports also. A lot of journalists have gone there, and just yesterday I read a report by Arunabh Saikia in Scroll, which is a ground report, very well researched and very well written as well. So, people have gone there and they have reported from there, and some of those reports have been well researched and well written and credible. Uh, as far as the propaganda of narco-terrorism is concerned, I think I'll refer back to something I mentioned a little while earlier and say that please go to the internet itself, and you'll find in interviews in various places of Tharnajan Vrinda. Have a look at those interviews either in print or on YouTube, and you can see for yourself what somebody who's a Meitei from Manipur, former police officer who knows the lay of the land, has said about the matter. And so information, I think, is if you look for it, you'll find it. And of course, one has to sift and sort what is credible, what is not. And there are, of course, very strong polarized positions in issues like this. So maybe you have to look for, you know, what is biased and what is not, and what is uh, maybe hear what different people are saying and see uh, you know, who are the credible voices who have been speaking in a reasonably balanced manner about this issue, which is, of course, very strongly emotive and difficult to be very balanced about.
I actually don't think that it is difficult to be balanced about it. I disagree with you there, Shamrat, but I think quite it is it is imperative to be balanced about it. Been it has been escalated to a particular situation, and I believe it has also been allowed to escalate to a particular situation where balance has become the first casualty of truths. And I say this advisedly. There are many truths, but I, you know, I said my piece about narco terrorism, or this sort of this absolute misdirection of narco terrorism, which I think is propaganda in the way it's been projected, and I think that by itself is an abomination, because it paints an entire people in that light, which I think is utterly wrong and unconscionable. Uh, in every way. And Shamrat was mentioning Tonamjam Brinda, who's an IPS officer who resigned under protest because she actually interdicted let me say it out, and then you know how to search for it better. So let me take this upon myself, Samra, where she actually been quoted in various media circles as a police officer about how she interdicted vast consignments of narcotics. And uh, there were non-Meitei people involved, but she also mentions quite categorically in her interactions that the highest people in the land of Manipur or in the territory of Manipur in government, the very highest people in government, uh, directly, and so says a former very well respected officer of the Indian Police Service, IPS, right? If I'm not wrong, Shabnat, she was IPS. And
I'm not sure about that,
or,
but
what she, or she was Manipur police at the very
yeah,
least.
yeah,
You know,
she was Manipur police, and she was in the narcotics and affairs of border department.
yeah. So, but I thought she had I mean, I thought she had an affiliation with IPS. No matter. I could be. I mean, I can check back. You know, maybe that's a short-term memory loss for me. But her designation is not important here. The fact that she wore a police uniform which said Manipur Police, she represented Manipur Police as a upstanding officer is what's important, and she was doing her duty, literally doing her duty, and she interdicted several consignments of narcotics, and she said that she was ordered, and it was hinted to her that she should sort of withdraw complaints, and she should no longer pursue her duty of interdiction because it came from the very, very top level of Manipur government, and not just I'm not talking about the administrative levels here. I'm talking about the very highest political levels of Manipur. So I think let that be placed out there, and unless the what's called the IT cell will now actively go ahead and do a Tiananmen Square on erasure of uh, Tiananmen Square like erasures, as happens in Chinese media, and will apply it to what is available in Indian media on this particular case and claim. Moving on from that to our colleague's question on, whether the sort of protection, if you will, of sort of minorities in Manipur, in that sense. So I think that there is affirmative action in any case. So an article, a subsection of the Article 371 of the Indian Constitution provides for the hill people. I'm simplifying it. I'm not saying it word for word in the article. It provides for the hill residents of the hills or of Manipur, uh, uh, sort of special provisions by which their customary laws and their lands and the territories can be protected. And I think that is ingrained into this, and that is why I think many hill people in Manipur were concerned with this admission of this petition in Manipur High Court, which would have accorded their kind of status to the people who were residents of the plains, if you will, if I may put it as like, or the Meitei people, their scheduled tribe status. So there are safeguards in place, and not just in Manipur, the safeguards in place in all of Nagaland under 371, Article 371A. In fact, ironically, the provisions that have been taken away from Kashmir, Article 370 and Article 35A, continue to live in northeastern India through Articles 371 A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. I think it stops at H, if I'm not wrong. Right? Applicable to nearly all the states of what we call northeastern India. So, but that again, I mean, you open Pandora's very large box in this particular case, or sub box within Pandora's box. But the point being that these are actions of these are sort of provisions of affirmative action guaranteed by the Constitution of India, and which devolves to the people of Manipur as well. So I think that is protected, and I think that has been. Um, I, so and here I'm concerned that there is going to be this mistrust between communities is going to make peacemaking a heck of an exercise right now, because as I mentioned earlier, the no communities, definitely the non-Meitei communities, do not trust the government, do not trust political parties, certainly don't trust the police in this point. So who talks to whom? I believe that there is a way ahead, because ironically, again, because of Manipur's record of conflict over the decades, there are actually many NGOs who have formed dialogue mechanisms over the years which allowed one community to speak to another community. So, like for instance, there are umbrella NGO organizations in Manipur where Naga NGOs, Meitei NGOs, Kuki NGOs, Zo NGOs would come under a sort of an umbrella organization which had channels of dialogue. And I have personally seen sort of conflict resolution exercise being done in such NGOs, which affect, sort of with the Naga people, for instance, and the Meitei people, or the Kuki and the Naga, or the Zo and the Kuki, or the Zo and the Meitei, or the Zo and the Naga. So, these processes have been in place. So there are mechanisms in place, practiced mechanisms in place. Should the people of Manipur, the various communities of Manipur, are able to dial down the suspicion and engineered hatreds and walk that path to sort of understanding over misunderstanding, and walk a path to not reconciliation in the first step, but at least walk, talk down their animosity, talk down their hatred, talk down the conflict, and sort of walk towards that process where conflict resolution can begin to happen. So it can happen even without the help of police and government. It can happen among communities. And I sincerely hope that happens, because that is the most sincere peacemaking process. Now, to the other point about whether it is a sort of, sort of an anti-Christian thing, I don't really think so. Because you mentioned Nagaland, the questioner mentioned Nagaland. What is the lady's name, Nilovit? Uh, my apologies. The question came from whom?
The question came from Deepa George.
Deepa George. Deepa, if I may call you Deepa. So I don't think it is essentially a sort of a Christian versus Hindu thing, because I mentioned this specifically because you mentioned Nagaland and you mentioned Meghalaya. Now let me tell you that the majority of Nagaland are Christian, right? Not Catholics necessarily, but many denominations of Protestant faiths. And the government of Nagaland are partner. I mean, the coalition that leads Nagaland, the main party, are partners of partners of the BJP and support the National Democratic Alliance. The National Democratic Alliance could be a sort of a contradiction in terms, but that's for another time and another place. Equally in Meghalaya, NPP, which runs the government of Meghalaya, and Conrad Sangma, and Meghalaya is also largely Christian. And I think the percentage of Catholics in Meghalaya are larger than the percentage of Catholics in Nagaland. But even so, I mean, there are other denominations of Christianity in Meghalaya. Now, NPP too are partners of the NDA, the BJP, and so I don't think it's there's a project, unless it's a fevered project that brought in the Princess Chitrangada as sort of into the national mainstream, or bring in Mahabharata and probably Ramayana. They'll find a way to bring Ramayana into the picture, or some other myths and mythologies and other mythological texts into the picture for that particular idea of India. I don't think there is by any stretch of imagination that the people of Nagaland are going to accept being called Hindus in the near future or the far future. And I don't think the largely Christian communities of Meghalaya are about to give in to the fevered imaginations of the Sangh by saying that even though some Khasi people have a sort of call themselves Singh, but it's not the same Singh as the Sangh Parivar might want to believe in. You know, that's a different history altogether. I don't think the people of Meghalaya are about to sort of drop their identities and dignities and their religion and sort of embrace this grand construct of majority or of Hinduism, or this fevered ultranationalist Hinduism, simply because it's the flavor of the day. So I don't think it's necessarily sort of an anti-Christian project in Manipur. I think in Manipur, and definitely I don't think it's going to affect Nagaland and Meghalaya, to answer your question. In Manipur, I don't think it's an anti-Christian project as much as it's a protect our vote bank in the valley project. I think that is it. It needs, perhaps it needs to be, it could be looked at more practically from that point of view. So I don't think it's anti-Christian, because there are BJP MLAs among the hill people as well in Manipur. In fact, there are cookies in the BJP construct who now refuse to be part of governance in Manipur because they've been shunned and they've been called narco terrorists out of the blue. So I don't think religion at this particular point of time will be damaging in the way that you believe, or the or could be a danger. Could be a danger to Nagaland and Meghalaya, for instance. I don't think so. Not in the foreseeable future. Thank you.
Yeah, so I also have one very interesting question coming up from Professor Mridu Rai. She asks that, now, do you blame just the current government? Do you hold the current government accountable for the current situation in Manipur, uh, or do you have to place it on the hundreds of years of governance and the other regimes that have come before the BJP government for the current situation uh, and the current conflict? We'd love to hear your takes on this.
Uh, Sudeep, shall I? Okay. Uh, well, can you hear me? Hello. Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, of
So
course.
yeah. So yeah. I mean, see, Sudeep, I think earlier mentioned, he spoke a little bit about the way things were in Manipur under the Congress, and he was quite critical of what was happening at the time, and rightly so, because uh, things. I mean, there were so many fake encounters about which cases are going on in the have been going on in the Supreme Court of India endlessly. 1,542 fake encounter killings about which cases have been going on and on, and those happened under previous governments, Congress governments. So, uh, so it is true that there has been a long history, in a certain sense, of uh, things going wrong and extreme reactions. The Armed Forces Special Powers Act was brought in by the Nehru government, and so it's not a new thing at all. And it was the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, Assam and Manipur. So right from the beginning, 1958, it's been there, and so of course there is a long history to all of this. Uh, I think personally, the way I see it, I have written about this in the Caravan a couple of months ago. I think it was published. Was that the idea of nationalism has been very problematic uh, for India as a whole, because we are a very diverse country, and because after all these are multiple nationalisms. You have Meitei nationalism, or Manipuri nationalism, which is essentially Meitei driven. So it is essentially Meitei nationalism. You've got Kuki nationalism. You've got Naga nationalism. You had the Alpha, which wanted an independent Assam at one time, and some sections still do. And so there are so many competing nationalisms, and each one has its own map and its own idea of territory, and that is why the issue is not resolvable. But the moment you accept the idea of nationalism, that every community with its own identity and history is entitled to lord it over a certain territory, have its own map and its own administration in a certain territory, you're going to have this problem, because basically then you'll have people wanting to have that territory that they own, where everybody else becomes, the minorities become in a certain sense second class, and the majority becomes the lords. And who would not like to be lord in their own corner? So then you're going to have this going on and on. So I think the basic theoretical issue is basically the idea of nationalism itself, in all its manifestations, whether it is Indian or Burmese or uh, Naga or Meitei or Kuki, whatever it may be. And how do you square these various nationalisms with their competing ideas of territory? I don't see any way that that can be done. So they'll all keep rubbing up against each other and fighting with each other endlessly unless they can work out a way to coexist.
I I would come at it from a less theoretical perspective and more a sort of a perspective of a practitioner or the practice on the ground as we see it kind of perspective. Um, and I just mentioned two or three things. One is that uh, I, though the stresses, for instance, let's talk about Manipur right now, uh, rather than all of northeastern India, where the stresses have, of course, been created, to my mind, and sort of been uh, increased or made worse through various administrations of all stripes since India's independence in 1947. So everyone is culpable, to my mind, for the conflicts that have come, because it doesn't mean that you can't blame the past for creating conflicts and carry on without trying to resolve the conflict, right? So I mean, are if you let conflict continue, then you're as culpable as the guys who you blame for creating the conflict. To my mind, that's the way I look at it as a conflict resolution specialist, or or a conflict studies person in that particular case, or a historian, or chronicler, or writer, or analyst, whatever researcher. Point is this: that in Manipur, you have a situation where, yes, governments since Manipur's accession in 1949, and then its formal becoming of a state in the early 70s. Ever since, and to this day, fractures have existed. Fractures have got worse, sometimes it's better, and now Manipur is in fracture, is in a state of fracture. Uh, and now, I don't think that uh, I have seen in Manipur fracture to this degree as I see it now, as we see it now. And I think people in Manipur would be the first to talk about that. They've talked about disenchantment, they've talked about distress. Since 1949, it's a very emotive issue with the Meitei people, not so much with the Naga and the Zo and the Kuki, mainly the Meitei. The accession to India in 1949, it is a solidly Meitei emotion. It's a largely Meitei emotion, not an overall Manipuri emotion. Number one. So that's been there. Rebellions, the movements of nationalism grew into movements of outright rebellion in the 1980s, when again there was sort of extra pressure put, mismanagement, shoddy governance, uh, arrogance, sort of very over-centralized arrogance on the parts of various governments of India and its security appendages like the army, uh, paramilitary units, and so on and so forth. All that is true. But the so there has been resentment that has been there for many decades now. The fracture that we see today is has taken all the past resentments and sort of made it into a new horror show altogether. So you have a whole different scale of horror right now, a whole different scale of resentment at this point of time in Manipur, which is new. Now, I mean, you want to go back? Let's go back to 2001, when, I mean, here I want to bring in the Naga peace process, which as an example of the fractured mindsets in Manipur. Now, many of our friends may not know, but the large part of northern Manipur are actually Naga homelands. And there's this bizarre ceasefire that is in place with the Naga rebel groups and the government of India, is that the ceasefire is not applicable to any other part of in territorial India outside of the territorial limits of Nagaland state. So that means technically the Nagas who live in Manipur are at war. And do you know why this is true? Because the Meiteis went ballistic in the early 2000s when, as part of the Naga peace process, when Mr. Vajpayee, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, was prime minister. And during his time of prime ministership, when there was a Congress government in Manipur, and it doesn't matter, it wouldn't have mattered if there was a BJP government in Manipur at that point of time, to my mind, because the but let me make this point. That time there was a the content of the language of of the statement put out at the time was that the ceasefire being extended to essentially include all Naga homelands. Imphal and Imphal Valley was on fire within hours. Government buildings were torched by Meitei activists, nationalists, and citizens on the people. People shaved their heads in grief, and they tonsured their heads in lament. Uh, Books were burned, buildings were torched, vehicles were set on fire. So people were shot at, people died in that thing. Why? Because it was essentially portrayed that if the Nagas, ceasefire is extended to the Naga areas of Manipur, for instance, then it would be almost accepting, it would be as close to accepting that it was just the first step to the creation of a larger Naga homeland. And which is why the Vajpayee government and its interlocutors walked back that statement to status quo ante, the situation as it existed before, and the situation as it exists today as we speak, ladies and gentlemen. That because there's this paranoia in Manipur that oh my God, that the Nagas will take away all our northern lands and we'll lose territorial Manipur. So again and again and again, I bring this up with a particular emphasis, is that if you see some of the rhetoric today and some of the language being spoken by nationalists in Manipur today, you will see, and organizations like Kokomi and others who are making statements, again and again they state that they want guarantees that the territorial integrity of Manipur will not be destroyed, i.e., it goes back to the Nagas, sort of the territorial integrity of Manipur being retained. And this, at this point in time, it points to the Kuki demand for autonomy, administrative autonomy, because the Kuki demand is nothing that we can't live with the Meitei people. We've been shunned, we've been called whatever, all kinds of names. We belong in this, so why should we be governed by the Meiteis? We want our own autonomy. So the counter to that is something that was Nagas not too long ago, saying, don't you dare do this. And I think that is one of the key reasons why the Naga Peace Treaty has not been signed to this date, since this framework agreement of peace, which was signed in the home, the residence of Prime Minister Narendra Modi on August 3rd, 2015. And now we're past August in 2023, 8 years since it's been signed. And I think this is one of the key reasons why it has not been signed, is that if it is signed, and if it is extended to include the Naga homelands in Manipur, which it must, and in Arunachal Pradesh, and in Assam, because Naga peace must involve peace all across the Naga homelands. Logically, that's what it means. But Manipur will be on fire again, like it was in 2001. The Imphal Valley will be on fire. And I think now that the government in Delhi is a BJP-led government, and the government in Manipur is a BJP-led government, I think it is one of the key reasons why, to protect its base, its sort of voting population, its vote bank. People talk about the Muslim vote bank and the Dalit vote bank. What about the Hindu vote bank? That people, this vote bank is not talked about at all. So I think in Manipur's case, the BJP doesn't want to lose that. I mean, and I've written about this in several places and spoken about it. One of the reasons, there are many reasons why the peace treaty, the peace deal hasn't been signed into actual peace. Many reasons, but this is one key reason. So there is this paranoia about this fractured, disintegrated Manipur. But for heaven's sake, you've brought it to this thing. And I also will mention one point here, and I'll stop after this. Is that there is this current myth being floated in Manipur that how can the Kuki demand under the sixth schedule of the Indian Constitution? How can it demand a sort of an autonomous district council, if you will, or autonomous council for administration, right? It has never happened in Manipur's history. That's wrong because the Nagas under the United Naga Council of Manipur (UNC) have actually constructed this idea called the alternative arrangement, which has been in which has been officially in play for more than a decade now, right? Where the Nagas, similarly, like the Kukis are worked up now, the Nagas were worked up then against the Meitei domination primarily. And they wanted an autonomous unit where they were willing to answer directly to New Delhi's administrative authority, but not Imphaal's administrative authority. And that, my friends, is what the alternative arrangement is all about. And for the record, the government of India, the government of Manipur, and the United Naga Council of Manipur, which is the apex body of the Naga tribes, Naga people of Manipur, are in a tripartite conversation to discuss the alternative arrangement and its possible conclusion. It's another matter that meetings have been stalled. Meetings don't progress because the Nagas, the UNC people I've spoken to, and other bureaucrats and insiders I've spoken to say, Imphal is going slow on it for obvious reasons. So it's completely disingenuous to suggest that the Kukis are asking for something new. The Nagas asked for it more than a decade ago, and the government of Manipur are party to it. Meetings have been for the alternative arrangement negotiations have taken place in Senapati in Manipur, have taken place in New Delhi in the Ministry of Home Affairs. What rubbish are people talking about? So there's a lot of these strands of disinformation, misinformation, misdirection, and mythology floating around. And we need to step away from this kind of obfuscation and misdirection, step away from this grandstanding that happens on mainstream TV and mainstream wire services these days in India, where these spokespersons are given platforms and they say the vilest things about other people. This needs to stop. We need to walk back from the precipice that Manipur is now in. We have to walk back. Otherwise, Manipur will not exist as we know it today. This you take from me. I'm willing to stick my neck out and say this, that unless people walk back from their extreme positions and start talking peace and forget reconciliation, speak conciliation first, you are looking at an absolute fracture of Manipur. Manipur's map will change, and Manipur will have done it to itself. You cannot blame mainland India for this. And beyond the point, you also have to accept responsibility that you've messed up. Yes, you can blame government of India for this and the security forces of India for this till eternity. Fine, it's all a matter of record. But please accept the responsibility that you've messed up as well. That must be part of the conversation. Otherwise, we're looking at a complete disaster. And, I wish all people of Manipur well, and I wish people would see sense and have sensibility and walk back from this absolute precipice that Manipur is probably going over even as we speak. Sorry, I'll stop here. I mean, I just get worked up when I see, nonsense prevailing over common sense and nonsense prevailing over good sense. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Sudeep Babu. And I think we have time for taking two very short questions. So there is this one very factual question coming up from Vitika Shane. She asks that, and as the conflict rages on predominantly between the Meitei and the Kuki communities, the major tribes accounting for much of Manipur's population, what position do the minor tribes like Aimol occupy in this situation?
Okay. Shamra, can I go on this and then you can jump in? Is that if that's okay? Now, so it has become a Meitei versus Kuki thing, but just for the record, when people came out on the streets to protest sort of the STIization of the Meitei people, if you will, the Nagas and the Kukis were marching together. Let's not forget this. When violence erupted, uh, and the Nagas were sort of initially they almost got drawn into the violence, but I think sage advice prevailed and good sense prevailed, and they sort of walked. The Nagas have walked back from a precipice, and they've sort of held back. They refuse to be drawn into this sort of violence, even though the Nagas and Kukis have had their own bloodletting in the 1990s, triggered largely by Naga sort of apex leadership of major Naga rebel groups. I've taken their names elsewhere. I won't take their names right now. But having said that, it has become now a Naga, sort of a Meitei versus Kuki construct, and it is convenient to do it that way because violence has largely been between the Meitei and the Kuki people. But the objections that the Kuki brought to the table, and the objections Kukis bring to the table about administrative independence, about dignity and identity and recognition of their needs and their people, apply equally to the other people of Manipur, including the Zo people, the Zomi, uh, including all the Naga people, and the Aimol, as you mentioned, come into that construct. The Aimol are actually very sort of teetering on the edge, sort of the southeastern edge of Imphal Valley. The Aimol homeland is actually somewhere near Palel, in the Palel area of, which is sort of where the hills, the valley gives way to the hills, and then the road climbs up from the valley up to Tengnupal and then down again to More. So the Aimol people are, if I'm not wrong, if my political geography and the ethnic geography is correct, the Aimol people, the Aimol tribe are located. In fact, I went to Aimol village called Aimol Tampak, which is just to the north of Palel, where the Aimol people largely are. So they're actually the Aimol people. If my again, as I say, if my geography checks out, are sort of at the one edge of the valley and one edge of where the hills begin. So, uh, I mean, the Aimos are will be caught in the slipstream of uh, sort of Manipur's fracture, like any other people, because now everybody in Manipur, whether they're Meitei or Kuki or Zo or Naga or Aimol, are vulnerable in their own way. I mean, if the Kukis are out of the Imphal Valley, it is not like the Meitei are leading lives of, they sleep well at night, and there's immense stress in Imphal Valley and among the Meitei people as well. Despite all the nationalism, this fracture, this violence has not done Manipur and all its people any good whatsoever, and that includes the Aimor. Samrat, I'm done.
Okay. Uh, I'd like to, you've spoken about the IMOL. I'd like to just mention that a few days, 2, 3 days ago, there was this letter that Maricom sent to Amit Shah.
Indeed. Yeah,
And
indeed.
so the
Well said.
com community is also for one of those who are caught in the middle, and they're saying we are neither Naga nor Kuki. We don't want to be part of this fight between the Kuki and the Meitei, but we're getting caught in the middle. So I guess there are, the issues of identity. There are people and communities who are just being caught in the middle,
Indeed.
who don't want to be caught in the middle.
I think there is also a Jewish community, the Bene Menashe community that lives in Manipur, that stays in Manipur, and I think they're also that they have also been caught in the
Mizoram,
crossfire
I
of this
thought.
conflict.
I
And also, if you
thought
yeah,
they're
very
in
close to the
Mizoram.
Manipur border.
Right. Yeah, but you can't say that they're in Manipur. I don't think that flows. But
Sure.
you obviously have a point, Niloit. What was your point?
Yeah, so I also had one last question, and which Rahul Chandravarkar asks, and I want to close this panel discussion after the discussion of this question. And he asks that in Manipur, it looks like a blatant case of ethnic cleansing. Do you think this situation will ever be allowed to be reversed given the BJP's political ambitions? I think that part of the question has already been discussed, but if you have any closing comments, I will welcome it.
Uh, I personally believe that the BJP. Sorry, Shamrat, did you want to go? Because
It's fine.
no, go ahead. Feel free.
Okay. I have, I mean, I'll just have a very brief thing to say, which is that it's very hard to undo these things. It's extremely hard to undo. Once there is a breakdown of trust, once people have been driven out of homes, their houses have been burned, people have been killed, people have died, so many people have died. Uh, how do you undo that? I mean, things, conflicts, smaller conflicts, riots which have happened. The Gujarat riot was just what, a few days, and it was a riot. This is more like a civil war, and it's been going on for 4 months. So even those, they remain for a long time in collective memory, and it's very hard to undo them. So once something has happened, whether it's a major riot or something more serious, which is, this is, uh, it's very hard to undo the damage that is done. It will not be, in my view, I don't think it can be undone. The damage that has been done cannot be undone in a few years also. It may well take decades.
I would agree with Shamrat with as far as this sort of it's a grand project of undoing the damage, and the effects of it will last several years. I'm in agreement in that, and I don't think there are very many people, certainly in Manipur, who will disagree with us when we say that, and we don't presume to speak on their behalf. Uh, our aim, must clarify this because our comments may even be misinterpreted as sort of cultural appropriation by people in Manipur, by saying, who the hell are these two people with Bengali names, even though they claim friendship with, people in Manipur, and they travel and they love the place and so on and so forth. And who the hell are they to speak on the behalf of people in Manipur? We are not speaking on behalf of the people in Manipur. We're speaking on the behalf of people, period, and the sort of grand conflagration of the sort of darkness that has enveloped Manipur through engineering and hubris and misgovernance and propaganda and all kinds of arrogances from all manner of people, including in Manipur. So it's a comment. It's our comments are based on that. I think Shamraj, you will won't disagree when I say this, but I don't. It's Rahul. It's difficult to say that if the BJP will see sense or not see sense. It is quite clear, though, that we are not seeing the sacking of N. Biren Singh as Chief Minister of Manipur, essentially because it would be an admission of failure. Uh, we didn't see a sort of an application or even the provisions or even the talk beyond by some opposition parties and even people saying that people saying president's rule, imposition of president's rule, because a complete breakdown of law and order in Manipur. For heaven's sake, if this is not a breakdown of law and order, then what is? And that has also happened because of the BJP connection or the umbilical that now connects New Delhi with Imphal, and the BJP umbilical in New Delhi and the BJP umbilical is connected with umbilically with the BJP and the Sangh project in Imphal / Manipur. Undoubtedly, this is it, and it is out there. Even if you don't want to talk about it, it's absolutely transparent. But will the BJP see wisdom in peace when it has traditionally seen wisdom in conflict in order to, sort of expand its political reach in India? I'm not. There are many people who have said it, and the BJP functionaries have themselves admitted that conflict has helped the party in more ways than one over the last several decades, since 1989. and now they're in parliament for two consecutive terms, and they've governed several states of India for one term or more, including in Manipur. It's the second term that the BJP-led government is in power. But the wisdom in the political arena is 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 wishful thinking. I mean, because wisdom is not seen in the way that you and I might look at wisdom, in terms of sort of bringing peace and resolution and conflict resolution and dignities and purpose. Politicians have a different parameter of wisdom altogether. I don't know if the BJP or any party for that matter, Congress has helped, Congress chief ministers have helped uh, deepen Manipur's fault lines before the BJP deepened Manipur's fault lines. So let me put it out there right away. Um, so many people blaming the BJP today for what's happened in Manipur were being blamed for what's happened in Manipur 2 terms ago, before 2017, including his three-term chief minister Okrame Bovi Singh of the Congress. So let me take some names. I think we shouldn't shy away from taking names and taking positions and at least analyzing truths for what they are or identifying truths for what they are. So the way, you know, again, I don't know what else can I say, is that will the BJP see wisdom? The BJP's wisdom is the BJP's wisdom. It is not your wisdom or my wisdom or Manipur's wisdom. I wish, though, that the people of Manipur, the Meitei, the Kuki, the Zo, and the Naga, have truly displayed wisdom and walk back from the path of darkness to the path of coexistence. That will be the wisdom. And if that happens, the BJP, trust me, will follow that wisdom. And the Congress will follow that wisdom, because they will think that this collective wisdom might help them retain, for the BJP, retain the government come the next elections, and will the Congress or other political parties will try to leverage this collective Manipuri wisdom for their ends. But right now, people are looking at I think the wisdom on the ground is how long can we keep the pot boiling in order to consolidate our positions, and that's the wisdom of darkness. That is not wisdom. That is just cynical. That is just pure cynicism. Thank you.
Sir, so my point about the point that I was making about the Beni Minashi. So actually, there are 5,000 members of the Beni Minashi who reside in the Indian state of Manipur, and
Yeah, the
so there
southern,
was
yeah.
this recent news
Uh,
that yeah, there was this recent news that came up where it was where it said that the one member of the Beni Minashi community fell victim to the violence, and in fact they were fighting with they're fighting shoulder to shoulder with the cookies in this conflict. So that was why I asked this question that and it also resonates with the larger
you know,
topic of the discussion that yeah, yes,
no, you were saying?
yes,
I'm
Sudeep,
listening
go
to you.
ahead. Yeah, so I think it resonates with the broader topic of the discussion that that this conflict is somehow larger than the cookie Meitei conflict, which the media has been trying to project it as. But no, I
What,
think that it
are you trying to get the
involves.
Israelis into the game now? Maybe that'll work. Maybe that'll work. Maybe if by using your leverage of the Beneminash, if now Israel jumps into the fray saying, you have to protect our people, then maybe the BJP's wisdom will sort of enhance because of the overall security infrastructure and, sort of India, Israel, bye bye, or whatever kind of thing. And maybe, I say this facetiously, of course, but I do take what you're saying in the spirit in which it was said, Miguel.
Um, I think that we have exceeded the time limit, so I think that we'll bring the panel discussion to an end on that note. Now, personally, it has been a privilege moderating this panel. I believe that the discussions that we had today were as much of a learning experience to all of you as much as it has been to me. I express my heartfelt thanks to Sudeep Babu and Shamrat Babu for agreeing to be on this panel. I think all of us understand that it takes immense courage to speak on issues as burning as Manipur, given the current state of affairs. Thanks again, and with that, I request Mihir to take charge of the floor. Thank you.
Uh, I will not hold you all for long. To Sudeep Babu and Shamrat Babu, thank you so much for this discussion. It was absolutely wonderful, extremely insightful, and very powerful. Uh, to Neil Lohit, thank you for moderating as part of, and to our audience and listeners, thank you all for tuning in, for your comments and questions, and here's to hoping we can walk a path of peace, reconciliation, and to a brighter future. Thank you. With that,